The end of each of the 12 disciples explained in just a few minutes. 1. James, son of Zebedee. James was the first of the 12 to die. He is one of the rare cases where the Bible records the execution of an apostle with the name, the method, and the ruler responsible. It was around the year AD 44, during the reign of Herod Agrippa I, grandson of the same Herod connected to the massacre in Bethlehem decades earlier. Agrippa was actively persecuting the leaders of the Christian movement in Jerusalem. Arresting them pleased the religious leaders. Killing them pleased them even more. So he ordered James to be killed with the sword, something directly recorded in Acts 12:2. It is a short verse, almost cold in its simplicity. No long speech, no dramatic scene, just the fact. But church history preserves an additional detail. Eusebius of Caesarea says that the soldier who led James to execution was so moved by the apostle's courage that he openly declared himself a Christian and was executed alongside him. The first martyr among the 12 did not die alone. 2. Peter. Peter was the best known of the apostles. He was loud, impulsive, visible in both his failures and his faith. He denied Jesus 3 times in one night, yet Jesus still chose him as a foundational figure in the early church. His death was foretold before it happened. In John 21:18-19, Jesus told Peter that when he grew old, others would stretch out his hands and lead him where he did not want to go. John then explains that Jesus was indicating the kind of death Peter would suffer. That prophecy was fulfilled in Rome during the persecution of Nero around AD 64. Peter was arrested and condemned to crucifixion. According to Origen, later quoted by Eusebius, Peter requested to be crucified upside down because he did not consider himself worthy to die in the same position as Jesus. Tradition also says that when the persecution intensified, Peter briefly tried to leave Rome. On the way out, he saw a vision of Jesus walking back into the city. Peter asked, "Lord, where are you going?" The answer implied that Christ was going to be crucified again. Peter understood, turned around, and went back to face his death. 3. Andrew. Andrew was Peter's brother, and according to John chapter 1, he was the one who first brought Peter to Jesus. Yet he remained in the shadow of his more famous brother for much of the biblical narrative. Andrew's death is traditionally placed in Patras, in Greece, around AD 60. He was crucified, but according to early tradition, not on a standard cross. He was bound to an X-shaped cross, later known as St. Andrew's Cross. That image would become so famous that it remains associated with the flag of Scotland to this day. Historical accounts suggest Andrew did not die quickly. He reportedly remained on the cross for 2 days, still speaking and preaching to those who passed by. The Roman governor who ordered the execution is said to have tried to release him under pressure from the crowd, but Andrew refused rescue. He stayed where he was and finished his course there. 4. Philip. Philip was one of the first men called by Jesus, as recorded in John chapter 1. He came from Bethsaida, the same town as Peter and Andrew. Like Andrew, Philip is one of those apostles people recognize by name, but often know very little about. Tradition places his death in Hierapolis, in the region of modern-day Turkey, where he had preached for years before being arrested. Sources differ on the exact method of his execution. Some say he was crucified, others say he was hanged. But the tradition is consistent that he died there around AD 80. To be precise, Philip is one of the apostles whose historical record contains more contradictions than others, and he is sometimes confused with Philip the deacon from Acts. Still, the strongest tradition places the apostle Philip in Hierapolis, and that is how his story has mainly been preserved. 5. Bartholomew, also identified by many with Nathanael. He first appears in the Gospel of John as the man who skeptically asked, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" Jesus saw him coming and described him as a man with no deceit in him. His end is associated with Armenia and is remembered as one of the most brutal in all apostolic tradition. According to the Roman martyrology and the Armenian apostolic tradition, Bartholomew was flayed alive before being beheaded. Armenia's ancient church, which honors him as one of its founders, has held that memory for centuries, not as legend in the abstract, but as part of its own identity. He began in doubt, questioning whether anything significant could come from Nazareth, and ended as one of the most violently martyred apostles in the ancient record. 6. Matthew. Before he became an apostle, Matthew was a tax collector for Rome and Capernaum. That job made him deeply unpopular among many Jews, since tax collectors were viewed as collaborators and often associated with corruption. Yet Jesus called him while he was sitting at the tax booth, and Matthew got up and followed him. That moment is recorded in Matthew 9:9. Matthew later became the author traditionally associated with the first gospel, the book that opens the New Testament. As for his death, the historical tradition is less certain about location, with Ethiopia and Persia both appearing in different sources. But the broad tradition agrees that he was martyred, likely by the sword. There is no dominant tradition claiming that Matthew died peacefully of old age. The man who carefully recorded the life of Jesus left comparatively little detail about his own final moments. 7. Thomas. Thomas died in Mylapore, near present-day Chennai in India, around AD 72. Tradition says he was pierced with spears while praying on a hill outside the city. He is remembered in the Gospels as the disciple who doubted and asked to see the wounds of the risen Christ before believing. But that same man, according to ancient tradition, traveled farther than any of the 12. While Peter went west to Rome and Andrew to Greece, Thomas went east, establishing Christian communities in India that trace their origins back nearly 2,000 years. When Portuguese missionaries later arrived in India, they found long-established Christian communities already claiming descent from Thomas's preaching. The apostle, remembered for doubt, ended up carrying the message of Christ farther than almost any other. 8. James, the son of Alphaeus. There is more than one James among the apostles, which often causes confusion. This James is distinct from James the son of Zebedee. He is often called James the Less. Tradition presents him as a leader in Jerusalem, in the very city where Jesus had been crucified. That position was both visible and dangerous. Around AD 62, he was reportedly taken to the top of the temple and thrown down. He survived the fall, then was stoned, and finally struck to death with a club used by a fuller. What makes his case particularly important is that we do not rely only on Christian sources. The Jewish historian Josephus, who was not a Christian, also records the death of James in Antiquities of the Jews, describing him as the brother of Jesus, who was called Christ, and stating that he was condemned and stoned. That matters, because it means an external first-century witness confirms the death of one of Jesus' followers. 9. Simon the Zealot. His name carries his background. The Zealots were associated with a radical movement that opposed Roman rule, sometimes violently. Jesus chose a man from that world and placed him alongside Matthew, a former tax collector for Rome. That alone says something about the strange unity of the apostolic circle. Tradition says Simon later went to Persia and was martyred there, possibly alongside Jude. The Roman martyrology describes his death as being sawn in half, one of the most severe images in the entire list. Yet despite the dramatic tradition of his death, Simon remains one of the least documented apostles in terms of life details. Beyond his name and title, the New Testament says very little about him. 10. Jude Thaddeus. This is not Judas Iscariot. Jude Thaddeus appears in the apostolic lists and is also associated with the question in John 14 about why Jesus would reveal himself to the disciples and not to the world. Tradition places him in Persia working together with Simon. The two are often remembered as being martyred in the same place and around the same time. Sources vary on the method of Jude's execution, describing either arrows or an axe. Armenian Christian tradition also honors him as one of the early founders of the faith in that region. His story, like Simon's, survives more in tradition than in detailed historical biography. 11. John the son of Zebedee. John was the brother of James and one of the closest disciples to Jesus. He was the one who remained at the foot of the cross while the others fled, and Jesus entrusted his mother to John's care there. Unlike the others, John is traditionally remembered as the only one who did not die by execution. But that was not because no one tried. Tertullian records that John was thrown into boiling oil in Rome under Emperor Domitian and survived. He was then exiled to Patmos, where he received and wrote the book of Revelation. After exile, he lived in Ephesus to an old age and died naturally. The one who stood by the cross when others ran was also the one who lived long enough to witness the next generation of the church. 12. Matthias. Matthias was not part of the original 12 during Jesus' earthly ministry, but he was chosen after the death of Judas Iscariot to restore the number. In Acts 1, the apostles set a clear requirement. The new man had to be someone who had been with Jesus from the baptism of John to the resurrection. 2 names were proposed, prayer was made, lots were cast, and Matthias was chosen. About his later ministry and death, the record is limited. Tradition commonly places his martyrdom in Jerusalem around AD 63, where he was stoned and then beheaded. Matthias entered the story to fill the vacancy left by betrayal, and according to tradition, ended by following the same costly path as the others. When you look at the end of these men together, the pattern is hard to ignore. Most died far from safety, far from power, far from any material reward. Only one died naturally, and even he endured exile and attempted execution first. That does not prove every later tradition in every detail, but it does show something serious. These were not men acting as if they had invented a useful myth. They lived and died as if they were absolutely convinced that what they had seen in Jesus Christ was true. If this opened your eyes to something you did not know about the Word of God, share this with someone else. Leave your like, subscribe to Daily Faith Ministry, and help spread the message.